Something about the look and feel of linen screams summer.
Summer.
So we're going to be using this underrated fabric to make a maxi skirt. The first item as part of our Pinterest inspired dream wardrobe. And we're making this with only 10 items. You're only going to need 2 measurements for this entire DIY. I lied. You'll need 3, but we'll get to that. So the first one is your waist circumference, and the second is your waist all the way down to the length that you want your skirt to be. So essentially we're creating a big fat rectangle. I'll just put the pattern on the screen because it will probably explain it way better than I can. You basically want your width to be almost 3 times as big as your actual waist so that you can gather it, and then the length is just from your waist to how long you actually want your skirt to be. You know that third measurement I lied about earlier? We're going to take our hip circumference and use that for our waistband. I'll put the guide on the screen, and once you've marked it out, we can cut it out. Can we have a round of applause for this shot, please? I know me talking ruins aesthetic, but look at the sky in this angle. Anyway, back to the point. You want to cut out your fabric and then we can move on to the next step. So now we've cut out our fabric pieces, I'm just going to stitch along the width of the skirt so that we can gather it. So let me show you how to do that. So for this stitch, you want to make sure that your stitch length is 4, you've set your machine to a straight stitch, and your tension is 0 or as close to 0 as possible. And that's just going to make sure that you can actually gather it when you're done stitching. Also, try your hardest, find that edge to back stitch because we're going to need that excess of thread later on to gather our skirt. We're back on the floor. I've just been thinking that I want my waistband to come out looking really neat, so I'm going to tweak the way that we do it. So eventually I'm thinking ahead, but we're not stitching over the gathers when we come to that point. So I'm going to show you a different method instead that is going to come out much neater. So I'm going to cut my waistband in half. I did put the correct guide on the screen for you guys to follow, so you can follow that in the pattern if you want to. I just feel like I was learning the best way to do this as I was actually doing it. A wise person once said it's best to learn from the mistakes of others, so I'm making mistakes so you don't have to. Now that I've cut it in half, I'm going to start by pulling on one of the threads that we stitched earlier to gather it, and I want the skirt to be as long as my waistband, so I'm adding as many gathers as I need to shorten it so that it fits the waistband length. This is actually kind of therapeutic, or therapeutic until you snap your thread. So you do want to make sure you take your time while you're doing this. If only someone had tapped me on my shoulder in this moment and said, slow down Rebecca, we've skipped a step here. But it's okay guys, we will use our seam ripper and we will fix it in a sec. But as you can see, I'm adding my waistband onto my skirt, one side at the back, one side at the front, and I'm just going to pin through all layers and then stitch that using about 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I've stitched the skirt to the bottom of the waistband, as you can see. Now I just need to finish off the top part. So what I'm going to do is just fold it in by about 1/2 inch on both sides like this. And I'm just going to press and do a straight stitch all the way down. That is what's going to make the waistband come out so much neater. Another thing I've realised with linen, pressing before you stitch makes the absolute world of difference in making sure your stitches come out so much neater. Now I'm just stitching the top of our waistband. I'm using the tiniest amount of seam allowance I can possibly get away with, but you could use a quarter inch seam allowance if you want to as well. Guys, we've made a mistake, or we skipped a step. So I was supposed to stitch down the side seam before adding the waistband, and I could just stitch the side seam and like fold it like this, but this is going to be way too bulky for me to stitch through for the waistband, so I'm going to see if there's a way that we can fix it. So I had to seam rip my waistband a little bit, just enough for me to be able to fold and then stitch the side seam down, which we should have done before. So as you can see, I'm just folding it once and folding it again, and I'm clipping it, and I'm just going to do a stitch all the way down. I pressed the seams before I stitched it because pressing seams makes a world of difference. I've said it before, I'll say it again. So obviously, because I made a mistake, I've had to do this kind of like the long way round. So now I'm adding or stitching my waistband together, one for one side first and then for the other side. So I'm just opening it up and then stitching down to secure it, and I'm going to do that for the other side. I'm going to do a bit of flipping and turning to actually make it work. I basically spent the next 10 minutes figuring out how to fix my mistake. But in summary, once you stitch the ends of your waistband together, you can reattach it to the skirt. So you want to stitch the bottom of the waistband onto the skirt first where the gathers are, and then you can flip the waistband back up, tuck the insides in and stitch along the top so it's neat. You just want to make sure you leave about an inch gap so you can add in your elastic afterwards. Guys, I'm so tired, but luckily we're about 80 or 90% of the way done. So now I'm just going to take my elastic and I'm wrapping it around my waist, and you just want to mark and cut where the elastic meets so that we can add it to our waistband. So I'll cut my waistband so it fits my waist, and I'm going to add a safety pin to the end. I'm just going to use this to thread it in the hole and try to thread it through the entirety of my skirt until it pops back out through the other end of the hole. I'll be so honest with you guys, this is my least favourite part of any sewing DIY because for some reason the safety pin always unhooks in the middle of my sewing project and then I have to start from scratch. If there's a better way to do this, guys, please let me know. But you do want to take your time with this. But once it finally pops out the other side, you can overlay your elastic and just do a stitch to secure it in place. We're almost done, guys. Once you've done with your elastic, you just want to close off that tiny gap at the top with a straight stitch so that the entirety of your waistband is secure and in place. Finally, we're moving on to do our hem. So the lazy way of doing this is what I did. I just put the meter ruler at the bottom of my fabric, drew a line with my pencil and then folded it once and then folded it again to have more like a rolled hem so it comes out neater and it looks a bit better. And then I just added my clips all the way around, pressed it because we want our seams and our stitches to come out neat, guys. And then you just want to stitch all the way around using the seam allowance that you've left. So here is what the skirt looks like on. Guys, I took a cheeky solo trip to Spain and this was honestly my favourite fit that I wore the entire trip. Honestly, a 10 out of 10. But yeah, if you did enjoy this video, guys, make sure you subscribe and check out this video next.